is my song analysis of Red Dust by Billy Woods. So Billy Woods is my favorite rapper of all time. He is. I just got into him recently, a couple years ago. Um, yeah, he's from DC area. This album specifically came out in 2019. It's a collaborative album with LA producer Kenny Siegel, and it's really about stereotypes. There's a lot about this greed, um, human emotion, and influence, gentrification, and a lot of themes of that of connections in Africa. Um, it's really an abstract album. Most of Billy's music is abstract hip hop. There's a lot of shocking lyrical content and pretty disturbing things he says, which is one of my favorite parts about him, which is a little more reminiscent of artists we talked about when we talked about the Detroit horrorcore scene. So just a little bit of background. Billy Woods is not his real name. No one knows his real name. He's very anonymous. He never shows his face online. But he was born in Washington, D.C. His mother is a literature professor from Jamaica, and his father is a Marxist revolutionary from Zimbabwe. His father was a politician and played a key role in Zimbabwe's War of Independence, and he later died in 1987 when Woods was 3. After his father's death, Woods and his mother immigrated to Washington, D.C. Woods attended Howard University, an extremely prestigious historically black university in D.C. Woods ended up dropping out of Howard and began getting involved in the New York City hip-hop scene in the 90s, formally writing his first song in 97. So, yeah, like I said, this is produced by Kenny Siegel, and it's really the main guitar sample as far as melody goes. I think it's said to be a sample from Broke by Modest Mouse, another one of my favorite bands. But it's you almost couldn't tell. It's very slowed down. A lot of layers have been added over it, and I think it's played down an octave by one of Kenny Siegel's friends, Ryan Crosby. And a lot of Billy's music is like this, right? It's a lot of slow, a lot of like fuzzy tones are added on it to give this kind of melancholy, kind of scary feel to it. A lot of static fuzz, there's the main percussion element is this rattle, which is very reminiscent of the African instrument, the accent. I don't know. I remember how to say it, but we talked about it in class. I think that's what it sounds like to me, at least, and that really connects to a lot of the themes in this song, which is a lot about like the African diaspora, war in Rwanda and Zimbabwe, and kind of gives that plays into the African theme that is very prominent in a lot of Billy's music. And there's also this other huge theme of the stereotype of the black man, this tribal, savage, jungle stereotype. We also talked about it a lot when we talked about like the black beat at the beginning of class. Also plays a huge role in the song. But in all, the beat portrays the feelings of tragedy, loss, reverb and tone reminiscent of like a church or large empty building, lots of like echoing going on. I mean, this feeling of isolation and loneliness, trapping the listener into the space alone with Billy. And this feeling changes as the song goes on. The lyrics begin to devolve into kind of a more serious and kind of scarier tone. And as this happens, there's kind of the synth that begins to play in, and it kind of sounds a lot like something that's like out of a 80s horror movie, I would describe it. But as far as percussion goes, it's really simple. A lot of the percussion on this album is not in a bad way. I really love it. This shaker that we talked about is very drawn out. It's very dramatic. It takes up a lot of space in the percussion. It's punctuated on the one, but it's very drawn out and kind of lasts throughout the bar. There's 2 variations of this bar that are alternated with one less kick drum. But very simple, very laid back. A lot of the production aspects come from the guitar and Billy's vocals, obviously. So we're going to begin with the chorus of the song. The chorus of the song, Billy draws connection from crime, greed, money, and drugs and ties it to this theme of sex. Red dust, and what the chorus refers to is Africa, where his father is from, and specifically the war and genocide and greed that fuels it. The symbol of the dust has a dual meaning. Woods is drawing connection from the war in Africa and the crack epidemic in the black community in the 80s. In the first line, it's not the heat, it's the dust. It can be concluded that this dust, which I've mentioned is the sand of Africa and the cocaine in New York City, is made up by red blood, or made red by blood. Followed up by, it's not the money, it's the rush, insinuating that this blood is fueled by greed. However, while greed is often coined as the main motivator for evil, Billy seems to believe that there is more to it than that. That's not the greed, that's not enough. Billy is hinting that some people are driven by the rush, alluding to this final verse of the song. Billy argues that harm and death make people feel good, reinforcing the stereotype of this tribal or savage. In the last two lines of the song, Billy makes the connection between crime and sex. It's not the act, it's the touch. It's how she arched her back when with the line abruptly being cut off. Leaving the rest of it to interpretation, but it's not crazy to assume that Billy is talking about sex here, which, like crime, drugs, and money, comes with this rush, which is kind of theme built throughout the chorus, that there is just this primal motivator for doing these things. And it's addicting, and you always want more. And Billy's arguing that this is rush is the main motivator for evil, along with greed. And in my interpretation of the chorus, Woods is describing the reality of being black, both in Africa with the war and genocide, and in New York City with crack cocaine. His family, who has fled war in Zimbabwe, thought they could flee to America, however, the same evils had taken new shape in the form of the crack epidemic and life in the neighborhoods that Billy grew up in. Woods is arguing that some people are just downright evil, and begins to allude to his own evils of murder and sexual violence in the final verse, which we will get to. But yeah, as far as structure of this song, there's the chorus, obviously, but it's kind of split up into two main lyrical sections, with the first verse, the second verse, which have very, very vastly different contexts. The first verse I kind of look at as more of a reflective, and I wouldn't say like it's more of like a, I don't know, it's more of like a step back. It's from the outside looking in. It's Billy's perspective, his life he lived, and a lot of commentary on the reality of the life he grew up in. So the first verse dives into the reality Woods was forced into, the people he was surrounded by, and the things happening around him. First half of the song, Woods makes it a point to separate himself from this reality. He describes himself as a victim of the world he was forced into, describing himself as morally better than the people around him at the time. And the big chunk of this verse here that I think is mostly important lyrically, I have on the screen here. I was in the ceiling when they swept the building. I kept my head down when the cops came for the children. I rode the train every day past that fucking prison. I broke bread with killers and rapists. I got money with people you should not leave with a child for 2 fucking seconds. And Billy really here is kind of explaining this the people he surrounded himself by. But he's very careful to separate himself. He's talking about being in the ceiling while they were being swept, in the train while they're in the prison. And he's kind of, like I mentioned earlier, like from the outside looking in. But yeah, it's really talking about the people he was around and the people who influenced him. And that influence plays a really huge role later in the song. But yeah, another really important aspect of this part of the verse is the guilt that Billy talks about a lot. He's very obsessed with this idea that he feels like he should be in the jail with them. He should have been swept up by them, but he's not. He has a lot of survivor's guilt, which is a huge part of the song here. So yeah, the first half of the song, Billy Woods is filled with guilt. He feels lucky to survive and make it out of where he's from, depicting a survivor's guilt in the line, "Don't tell me that's the past, I live in the past." Woods follows this up with a statement of how this life and the horrors that come with it are gentrified. White boys take what they want and just flip it. Billy points to the idealization of the gangster life, very prominent at the time. This idea that these horrible things that Billy's forced to live through are looked up to by many. And he blames, like he said, the white boys who just are going to fantasize it. But then he also, not directly in this song, but in lots of other songs on the album, he's blaming other rappers and their romanticization of these acts to the gentrification of his life, or of gangster reality. But the final lines of the song begins Woods' reinforcement of the ideals placed on him. He goes from isolation and embrangement, isolation, like I said, he was like separating himself from them, He begins to kind of shift to the forefront of the song. He becomes kind of the focal point of the song, and him himself takes a step forward from this commentator to the main character here. He then starts, as this theme kind of builds, that there is just this rush or this primal instinct that motivates evil, and Billy becomes this thing, right? He becomes this savage, and he kind of depicts himself as a crocodile swimming into the lake with he makes mentions to like volcanoes and such, and that he is the primal person, and that is victim to the rush, like all of the other people he's surrounded by. And he's really playing into this stereotype and this role that has been placed upon him. And this kind of brings us to the second verse of the song, and this is like why I love the song. That's why I picked the song. And the second verse is pretty awesome. If you've never listened to the song, I definitely recommend it. It's pretty crazy, but it's there's a lot to unpack, and I'm gonna try my best to do it in like a short amount of time here. But the verse kind of goes into, it starts by Billy mentioning this list, right? He says, "You on the list." This has kind of been theorized to be like a hit list, right? This is Billy's rage, and his anger has built up, and he wants to take it all out on this person at the top of his list, which he mentions. It's an unnamed person. He never mentions the gender of this person either, although he does mention like shaving the neck, like I see a nick from shaving, he'll say later, which kind of hints to the fact that this person is a man, but it's never guaranteed, or it's never confirmed. But this verse follows Billy fantasizing and dreaming about what he's going to do to this person. He has all these dark thoughts about eating this person, eating their bone marrow, having sex with them, and killing them. And he wants to do all these things. He obsesses. He talks about praying about it. The lyrics devolve into downright cannibalistic, sexual, and sadistic obsessions about what he wants to do to this person. Talks about how he wants to eat their bone marrow, swallow them, make them feel the hate he feels. He says, the first quote that I really want to draw attention to is, "I want us to be alone in your home. I want to suck the marrow out your bones." He then, all this hate he's accumulating, and he's taking it out on this person, and it kind of builds up to this kind of finale of the song, where he says, "So close, I can see a nick from shaving, your neck so exposed, your throat would open like a hose, eyes wide open, I would watch you go." And it's kind of this poetic ending of him just murdering this person, taking his hate and anger out. There's never mentions of stealing anything from this person. There's no motive, there's no financial gain, there's no greed. It's simply this primal instinct that has taken over Billy and resulted in him doing this thing to this person here. Yeah, but in conclusion, it's an analysis of the world's evils, greed, primal instincts, themes of Africa, war, and kind of I really like it because this album is really it definitely goes into Billy as Billy's stories, but I love how he kind of takes this step from this sociologist and this poet commenting on this thing to really just absorbing it and becoming the thing that he had been commenting on this whole time. Yeah, it's awesome. So yeah, as far as poetic devices goes, I am of the belief that Billy Woods is one of the most poetic artists out there. He is very smart, very intellectual, and a lot of it comes from his mother, who I said is a literature professor. Both of his parents very highly educated. He's very highly educated, and is a very smart guy. But yeah, in the first verse of the song, from lines 9 to 12, we see the repetition of the ISE sound. This rhyme is perfect for lines 11 and 12. Genocide hide, but then it becomes imperfect for line 13. Surprised. But for most of the rest of the song, Billy relies heavily on slant rhyming, with lines 1 through 3 rhyming dust, rush, crutch, or lines 13, 14 where box and block are rhymed. Most rhyming in Ren Dust are end rhymes, with Billy's rapping style being more reminiscent of spoken word and poetry rather than that of punctuated rhyming. Billy also takes advantages of repetition, with long portions of Red Dust beginning with I or its, drawing contrast between Billy's perspective and what is fact. Yeah, so then I'm going to go into some in-class connections, a lot of things here, a lot of topics covered in class and how they relate to the song. The first and the biggest one would be the African diaspora, really what we learned about in the very beginning of class. This huge idea of this tribal stereotype, and really that shaker sound, which is very exaggerated. There's a lot of lyrical references to this tribal imagery: volcano, crocodile, slither, savage. And the song title refers to the 1961 book about policing of Uganda and the wars and genocide in Rwanda, which I mentioned at the beginning. But it also alludes to the red sand of Rwanda, stained red by the bloodshed of the genocide mentioned in the book. And then, yeah, politics. This is my second in-class connection. Woods is very radically leftist. This obviously comes from his influence from his father, who was a Marxist revolutionary. But yeah, he's very elements of reality and conscious rapping, which we discussed in class. Rapping about systemic and political issues while using motifs and symbolisms, motifs and stories of his personal life. Billy in the song argues that hate and blood are influenced by exploitation and circumstance placed on the black community. And then crack cocaine, which is a huge underlying theme here. It's stated as a main motivator for greed and red dust. People consider the crack epidemic to be really what it causes the explosion of gang culture, especially in New York City, which Robin D.G. Kelly talks a lot about in Yo Mama's Dysfunctional, the book or the reading we were required to read for class. One quote from that I really think sums this up is, "Black working class communities were turned into war zones in the 80s." Yeah, and the kind of the aftermath of that is kind of what led to a lot of the horrors and the things that happened to Billy as a child, which he goes into a lot in his other songs. Billy utilizes his platform to make a historic connection between the reality of being black in America and the life of Africans in war-torn countries. And then I want to note that most of Billy's music is done in like a jazz, with jazz influenced production, most like Ethiops, which is probably his best album. There's a lot of jazz rap in there, very similar to like To Pimp a Butterfly, and the theme of jazz is kind of used to kind of pronounce, this theme of like being proud of black culture and empowerment. But yeah, and then the last in-class connection would be authenticity. Taking inspiration from hardcore rap, Billy uses this album to tell his life story, providing real events and building his ethos and authenticity, kind of building up his character. Billy has a lot of stories of his upbringing, and a lot of them are tied into they're all spoken in very beautiful ways. This being one of them. But yeah, I think the biggest thing about Billy and his stories that he puts into it is there's a twist on like the traditional braggadocious style of gangster rap, which we talked about a lot in class, right? A lot of this like bragging, I'm really cool because I have a gun and I killed this person, and a lot of like ghetto-centric rap. But Billy does, instead of shying away from it, Billy really embraces that, right? He tells the stories, but not in a very different way than what is traditional. He explains these stories as like something to be afraid of. They're horrible. He depicts them as like evil. He doesn't depict himself as this like super cool person to be looked up to, but he depicts himself as sadistic, cannibalistic, horrible person, and and it's the opposite of making people aspire to be like, he's making people scared, which I think is really interesting and kind of changes the tone and the light which people view a lot of the reality of living in DC and New York City. Yeah. So Billy is not proud of what he has done, combating the romanticization of gang life. Billy's commentary on critiques of criminalization align with the thoughts of Robin D.G. Kelly in their other book, Race Rebels, which I thought was also very significant to this song. But yeah, finally, Billy is attempting to push back against the glorification of violence. Billy's anti-violence view is different than that of native tongue members discussed in the class. Right, there's this whole idea of the native tongues, and they combat violence in their own way by like kind of shying away from it as a topic. But Billy kind of centers it as his topic, but kind of just shows it in a different light, which is really awesome. But yeah, that's my presentation. Awesome song. If you haven't heard it, you should check it out. And